name is Jess, and like many of you here tonight or watching online, I also have experienced the devastation of grief and loss. One of my earlier experiences occurred when I was 22 years old. The person closest to me, my younger brother Ryan, passed away tragically in a car accident. It was 3 weeks before his 21st birthday. The torment of losing my only sibling led me down a dark path of severe alcohol addiction. I went to multiple rehabs, but it always ended the same, in despair and relapse. It was during a relapse that I experienced a sexual assault, which resulted in pregnancy. Throughout the time I was pregnant, I did not experience many emotions. Looking back, I realized that I was numb. I had relapsed and blamed myself for being in a situation where I had blacked out drunk. It was my fault. I ultimately came to this decision to terminate my twin pregnancy at 8 weeks. Once this occurred, the emotional floodgates opened. Feeling both relief and regret simultaneously was confusing. I felt alone. I felt isolated. I didn't know anyone else who had made this decision. This was not something that people talked about. And if it was, it typically resulted in strong judgment, controversy, intense opinions, criticism, and hate. I spiraled further into alcoholism, which ultimately led to more trauma, and the cycle of addiction and trauma continued for many years. Through support groups, community, faith, family, lots of therapy, as well as a 1-year residential program, I was able to process my grief and trauma, and I have maintained complete sobriety for almost 7 years. I have had the privilege of sharing my story in a variety of settings, but the truth is I can be quite guarded and I struggle with vulnerability at times, but these are stories that deserve to be shared and heard. I love the quote by Viktor Frankl, an Austrian psychiatrist and survivor of Nazi concentration camps, in which he states, "In some ways, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning, such as the meaning of a sacrifice." Little did I know, almost a year ago, this quote would take on new significance in my life when my son, Josiah, was born prematurely. For the briefest moment, Josiah was laid on my chest, but I knew something was wrong when the doctors and nurses quickly snatched him away. No one explained to me what was happening, and all I could see was the look of horror on my husband's face. I had some complications during childbirth and sustained severe hemorrhaging. Therefore, I was not very coherent at the time. They took Josiah away to what I assumed was the neonatal intensive care unit, or the NICU, and my husband went with him. I was forced to stay behind in the delivery room by myself, receiving a few extra hours of care, not knowing how Josiah was doing. After missing the first 5 hours of my son's life, I was not prepared for what was next. Seeing my helpless little newborn on the CPAP machine because he could not breathe on his own, with a feeding tube down his throat and hooked up to all the wires and monitors, was only the beginning of some of the most challenging weeks of our lives. Even though the doctors let us know that there would be a NICU stay upon his birth due to his prematurity, there is nothing that prepares you to see your baby fight for his life and not knowing if and when you'll ever be able to take him home. My husband later informed me that when Josiah was born, he took one breath before he stopped breathing. They had to spend some time on Josiah in order to resuscitate him. As he watched it all unfold, he thought that we most certainly were going to lose our son. It is with so much gratitude I stand up here and say that I now have an almost 1-year-old who is happy and healthy. We did not lose him, and I am so thankful to have 2 living children. Even though we did not have to go through the pain of losing Josiah, we experienced a lot of grief throughout his birth and his NICU stay, which now I come to understand is birth trauma. The loss of having a quote-unquote normal birth, the first snuggles, breastfeeding, being discharged from the hospital with your baby, that was not our experience. And a lot of Josiah's firsts were done by medical professionals. The most painful part we had to grieve was the ability to be a complete family. It was agonizing to have our family be separated. We had to balance our time with Josiah in the NICU and our 2-year-old daughter at home, who did not have the ability to understand what was happening. Due to COVID restrictions, she was unable to even meet her brother for the first 3 weeks of his life. Our hearts were torn in 2 places, and it felt like we were always abandoning one of our children. It was during our NICU experience that I spent a lot of time reflecting. There was nothing I could do to change what had happened or the outcome. But I felt overwhelming empathy and heartache for all the parents and family members who go through trauma, grief, and loss. Some of the parents would be able to take their baby home, like we were with Josiah, but that is not everyone's reality. There is not enough support for parents and families who are grieving, whether it's through infertility, miscarriage, ectopic pregnancy, multiple losses, abortion, termination for medical reasons, the loss of a twin, stillbirth, birth trauma, SIDS, birth defects, and the list goes on. Families deserve help and support. You deserve help, support, and to believe that there is hope for healing. Part of my grief process was to change the trajectory of my career. I had been practicing in the mental health field as a licensed professional counselor and as a certified alcohol and drug counselor, recently starting my own private practice. However, it's been through my recent lived experience I developed a new passion and felt compelled to earn my certification in perinatal mental health. I now provide support to parents and families throughout the perinatal period, focusing on pregnancy challenges, birth trauma, as well as grief and loss. Postpartum Support International is the professional organization I am a part of, and it's the first organization to offer this type of certification. It has only been offered since August 2018, just 4 years ago. 1 in 4 pregnancies end in miscarriage. 1 in 160 pregnancies end in stillbirth. 10% of babies born require support in the NICU, and up to 46% of people identify with having birth trauma. With these prevalence rates, it's astounding to me the lack of resources. And that's part of the reason why we're all here tonight. We are here first and foremost to honor and remember the lives of our babies because they matter. And we are also here to offer you support and hope. You matter and we see you. Whether you are a parent, a partner, a grandparent, a sibling, a friend, a neighbor, a coworker, or an acquaintance, we see you. Not only have you experienced the loss of a baby, but there are so many other losses that go along with that. The loss of the future, loss of identity, loss of experience of pregnancy and childbirth, the loss of having a carefree pregnancy, loss of feeling healthy and normal, loss of control, and maybe the loss of closeness with your partner. Maybe you would have had a newborn at home with you this holiday season. Maybe you wanted your children to be close in age. Maybe this was your 5th and final round of IVF. Maybe you planned a vacation where you were going to be 6 months pregnant and now you're not. For grandparents, maybe you're seeing your own adult child in pain and you are concurrently grieving the life of your grandchild. For partners, maybe you feel like you aren't allowed to grieve because you need to be strong and you weren't the one who was pregnant. Birth and death have been a part of life since the beginning. It's the only thing that every single one of us will experience with certainty. Why then, as a society, are we so ill-equipped to even have the language to talk about it? This is especially true in the United States, where we live in a culture of positivity. There's a stigma around perinatal loss, in which the loss is not acknowledged, it is minimized, or it's taboo. Not being allowed to express painful emotions, having the attitude of just put on a happy face, or sweeping heavy and difficult situations under the rug further complicates grief. Many of us have been told one or more of the following by a family member, a friend, or even a medical professional. You are young, you can try again. At least you know you can get pregnant. At least you have another child or children. At least you weren't that far along. It was a false positive. This is a routine medical occurrence. Everything happens for a reason. It's for the best. You chose this. You can always adopt. It's time to move on, and time heals all wounds. Even though most people have good intentions, those statements are typically extremely hurtful, invalidating, and it minimizes the loss. It can cause further feelings of isolation and being misunderstood. Medical terminology itself can even imply blame. The very term miscarriage means to not carry the right way. It might feel like your body failed you or that it's your fault. Was it something I ate? I forgot to take a prenatal vitamin. That must have been it. I was working out too hard. I had too much caffeine. I stopped caffeine abruptly. Those thoughts might be going through your head. Sometimes there's guilt about choice, which is especially true for those who terminate for medical reasons, which is a very personal and controversial decision. Oftentimes, parents feel as though they can't disclose the decision to terminate, but rather choose to say they lost the baby to avoid negative judgments from friends, family, and the general public. This only compounds grief and feelings of guilt as they struggle with not being able to be open with their story. Experiencing a pregnancy loss or the death of a child is different from other types of loss because it is out of order to what is typical. It might be described as grief and trauma together. Developing PTSD is not uncommon. Flashbacks and nightmares, avoidance of those who are pregnant or events like baby showers, sleep problems, and hypervigilance are just several potential symptoms. So what can we do? If you are someone experiencing loss, it might be helpful to attend a support group or see a therapist who is trained in perinatal loss. Developing rituals, such as celebrating birth dates or acknowledge death anniversaries, might be meaningful. Also know that you are not crazy and you are not doing this wrong. There is not a correct way to grieve. In fact, some grief models that we were taught are completely false. Many of us were taught that grief has 5 phases: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Although we certainly can experience all of these, they are not distinct and separate. A more beneficial model associated with grief for perinatal loss is called the dual process model of coping with bereavement. This model acknowledges that we go back and forth between loss-oriented activities, such as crying, talking about the loss, looking at pictures, those types of things, as well as restoration-oriented activities like hanging out with a friend, watching a movie, and laughing. Allowing ourselves the time and space to focus on the loss, as well as permission to take a break from it, is the basis for this dynamic and healthy process. Now, if you're a person who is supporting someone through a loss, I encourage you to say things like, I know I can't take the pain away, but I am here to listen. I can be here to distract you if you need it. I'm here if you want to tell me about it. Or simply, How can I support you? Even though my brother's death was over 14 years ago, the pain is still there. My parents' pain of losing their son is still there. 14 years later, it is still there. To this day, his friends will reach out to me and tell me stories, and I cherish those moments so much. Having others acknowledge the pain doesn't add to it, it lessens it. I encourage all of you to share this burden if you are able. Grief illiteracy and avoidance must be replaced with compassion and connection. Hold space, provide validation, listen. Don't try to fix, don't judge or criticize, don't say time will heal all wounds, or anything else that is cliche. And if you have said or done these things, it's okay. Just apologize and change your approach. We are all learning how to heal together. In some ways, I no longer regret my decision to terminate my first pregnancy. If I had not, I doubt Josephine and Josiah would be here, and I can't imagine my life without them specifically. At the same time, a part of me will always long for my 2 children who are not living. My twins would be 8.5 years old if they were here today. Their names are Gwyneth and Evangeline. The truth is, time does not heal the pain, but we can use time as a container to do our grief work. So now, we will take that time to honor and remember our children.